everyone. If you could take your seats, that would be great. My name is Teresa Welsh. I'm a reporter with DevX. I'm very happy to see you all here today. I'd like to welcome you to our event. We hope it's going to be a very lively conversation. And we're going to have two panel discussions for you today, followed by audience Q&A, and also going to have a little bit of audience participation thrown in the middle as well. So we're actually going to start out by doing a test question with Mentimeter, which is our polling. And so you can do this on your phones. And so if you go to menti.com and enter the code up there, it'll give you the opportunity to select an answer, and then in real time, it'll pop up. And if anyone's not yet connected to the conference Wi-Fi, it's right there at the bottom for you. So I'll just give you all an opportunity to start that. And then I'm going to welcome our first panelists up to the stage. We have Patience Koku, who is a global participant in the Global Farmer Network, and Nyasha Maduki, MasterCard Foundation Scholar of Michigan State University. So I'd like to welcome you both to the stage to come up and have a seat. And so we wanted to have you all answer this question just so we have a good idea of who is in the room here with us today, as we're going to be talking about innovation, which touches on a lot of aspects of agriculture and crop protection and all of that. So thank you both so much for joining us here. And I'd love to start out with introductions for you both and how how you got involved and what brings you here today.
Okay, my name is Patience Koku, and I'm a farmer from Nigeria. I grow seed corn and grain, and I'm with the Global Farmer Network, so I'm very happy to be here. It's been a wonderful experience so far.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Nyasha Maduki. Well, I never wanted anything to do with agriculture. That's the first thing.
I wanted a controversial first statement in a conference about agriculture.
Yes, I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted maybe to work behind the desk, as a secretary or something with red lipstick and long nails, eating chocolate, saying, "Can I help you?" but life happened, and we moved from the city to the rural areas. And so I grew up on a small farm in Chukwembedzi, raised by my single mother. So that farm was everything to us. So she struggled to feed us. I saw her break her back in the farm, and we would wake up in the morning, go to the farm first, and then go to school. I never wanted farming. You can imagine that. You will be dirty and you are tired. So even if I wanted to be a doctor, because I was weeding in the morning, by the time I get to school, I'm tired. Mm-hmm. So maybe I would have been a doctor if there wasn't a lot of weeding along this way. So that's how my journey began into farming. And I told myself I'll never be into agriculture. I'll get a job, escape this poverty life, be a city girl. So I went to school and I studied biotechnology. So during those years as a biotechnology student, that's when there were a lot of misconceptions about GMOs. So I took an interest of wanting to know what this is. At the same time, our people were suffering from hunger and crop yield reduction and diseases and all this. And then I'm reading this technology, and then I'm understanding, this technology can improve this. This technology can make us have a better yield, weed-resistant crop, disease-resistant. So why were we suffering in the village all along? That's where my question was. So you go back home, you ask your mother. She says no to GMOs. I mean, do you even know what that means? Oh, we have cancer, we have this. So I took it upon myself that I'll try as much as I can to communicate this science, because this is where I wanted to get in, to communicate this science to the farmer in the village at the lowest point of understanding what GMO is and biotechnology is. So as an undergraduate, during my studies, I met Mark Linus. He gave a speech to us as students in Zimbabwe. He saw how we were doing science. We were doing science in a very primitive way. I mean, the petri dishes that we used were peanut butter jars. And so he came in and he fitted well and explained how science was in the developing world. And I was like, maybe I need to learn more about this subject. So I took it to say I want to learn more. So I finished my undergraduate And I had an amazing opportunity of coming here in 2014 as a member of the Global Farmers Network. So I had to learn more. Coming here and seeing the farms in Iowa, and I was like, wait a minute. These are family farms. Do you know how a family farm in my village looks like? It doesn't look like your farms. These are corporate. These farms that you have are supposed to be owned by companies. So it really shifted the way that I saw agriculture, and I was wondering where were we missing the gap. It seems like we are 20 years behind, and that's how the statistics are. African agriculture is 20 years behind in terms of innovation and technology. So we have to do something to bridge this gap. So now, today, I'm talking a lot, right? I know. So today, I'm a master's student in plant breeding and genetics at Michigan State University. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And you know, a lot of the issues that you just brought up are exactly why we're here today. We're here to talk about innovation and technology and some of the barriers that we face to getting that technology out to the field, to farmers like yourselves, and sharing it. So I'm interested to hear from you, Patience. You know, Nyasha was mentioning sort of some of the challenges in terms of convincing farmers that, you know, this technology and innovation is something that they need. Is that something that you run into? And how do you sort of work, you know, with communicating with people in your community about the importance of these things?
I think that farming is challenging everywhere in the world. And I think more so in certain parts like Africa, because people don't have access to mechanization or technology in general. I mean, I think that usually the issues don't lie so much with convincing the people, because I mean, like she said, if you have issues with weeds as a farmer, what would you be thinking? You'd be thinking, okay, what can help me not weed or weed less?
How do I fix this problem?
Yeah, how do I fix this problem? So if you have problems with fall armyworms like we have now, we grow corn, and we basically had okay farming seasons until I think 2015 was the first experience we had of the fall armyworms. And I mean, we basically would grow a crop you can project. My corn is going to go from germination to maturity in so and so days, and I can spray a couple of times. But then we had a very interesting phenomenon. We had these worms that just appeared from nowhere, and everything we did was just basically like a wasted effort. And we sprayed all kinds of sprays, we tried everything, until we found a few things that worked so I mean, I don't think that the farmers in Africa or in Nigeria generally need a lot of convincing. It's basically an issue of you have challenges, and if there's anything that can fix it or make your life better, just let's take the tractors, for example. Those are just simple things that here you take for granted, right? But in a country where people don't have access to tractors, they would spend the time. We have something, a particular type of hoe that people would use to make ridges to grow crop. So they don't have planters, they would plant it manually. And so, I mean, if you had a tractor, if you had a planter, if you had a boom sprayer, you know, and when we even come back to the issues with the fall armyworm, where we have to spray like 10 times in a farming season, you find that most farmers don't wear protective clothing. So they'd be, you know, now they're exposing themselves also to risks of having to spray without actually wearing what you need. So it's a lot of things that I realize that innovation really, no matter where you are in the world, is key to moving forward. And if you have something that helps you to do something that you do better, it's definitely a plus. So I don't think it's really a question of being convinced. You know, it's like preaching to the
choir.
To the converted.
Yeah. And Nyasha, I'd be interested to hear from you, you know, as you are in your studies at Michigan State, and, you know, sort of how you're using what you're learning in the classroom, you know, back at home, and communicating all the things you're learning about innovation and technology and why it's so important.
Wow. So most of my classes, I'm the only African student. Plant breeding classes, I'm the only African student. So that question of why are you here is always one in an international student to you're African. So I always stand out and have to say something in my classes, whether I like it or not. So one of the questions that I've been asked is, why are you studying plant breeding and genetics? When I listen to everyone in my class, they study because they want to do PhDs, they study because they want to be, on startup companies, Indigo, whatever. But for me, I say, I want to study because I want to understand this, to communicate this. So for them, it puzzles them, why do I want to know this, to communicate this? It's different from here. There is awareness of what this technology is. It's not only that people can understand and a way to use it, but back home, they do not understand. So if people have no information about this, are not aware, they're not well informed, they cannot make decisions. So you need someone to be well informed so that they can make a right choice. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to technology, so agricultural technology is not limited to GM technology. That's one aspect. We have technologies in ICT. Patients mentioned mechanization and all this. We have, even in the biological sector of technology, we still have marker-assisted selection that can help plant breeders. So my question is, why is Africa lagging behind? Say we're behind by 20 years. Why are we still going to come here 20 years to come and still talk about this and say, why are we still behind? These things have been there already. That's the truth. But why are we lagging behind? For me, I want to bridge that gap. So to say we have to move to the pace, we have to keep up. In order for us to produce, we have the land, we have the young people, the statistics show that. Why are we behind? That's the question for me. So there is need for us to bridge up the scientists, the private sector, and everyone to come into play.
And do you feel like part of the fact of that is because there's not communication between all the parties that you just mentioned, and something is getting lost in the middle, from folks that are here or around the world in a lab working on something that's really exciting that they feel is going to make a big difference in people's lives, but there's something preventing it from getting to the people that need it?
Yes. Oh, I'll come first to my point as a upcoming Norman Borlaug. I'll tell you this. I've never been home and seen a researcher talking to a farmer, a plant breeder talking to a farmer. I've never seen that. The only people who come to see the smallholder farmers are the contractors who have sorghum and everything coming up to pick up the bales so that they can sell and have their money in their banks. I've never seen a plant breeder talk to a farmer. So why is there no conversation between these two people? So when a scientist comes, I believe they'll be scared. So that's why we have farmers resisting technology, because they're not aware of it. They're scared of the scientists. You work in a lab, what do you do? So we need that fear to be gone between the farmer and the scientist. Norman Borlaug said, take it to the farmer. That's what we have to do. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's that bridge that has to be done. Not only that, we have politicians. Those are the hardest people to convince. Those people care about votes and votes and votes. Whatever that is going to make them re-elected, they will support. But if you say we have this technology that can help African farmers, if majority of the citizens are not aware of that, they will side the people who will elect them, who have no knowledge of what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. So we need our politicians to really value science over votes. So that's how I see it, because whatever that is in support of them getting votes, they will do it. But if it's technology and the majority of people are saying no, so they will say no too. But who is suffering at the end of the day? Mm-hmm. So for me, it's that partnership of the farmer, the researcher, and the politicians, because they have to provide enabling policies for farmers to choose what they want to use. So if that is not established, we're not going anywhere.
And patients, do you feel similarly that there's sort of a disconnect of trust between, farmers and scientists that are coming into your community?
Well, I would say that there would be a gap in communication generally, but I think that when you say that the scientists, just basically even with just basic science, right? If you go to a doctor, you hardly ever understand what the doctor is saying. So it's just basically that someone be able to explain it to the farmer and say, okay, this is what science has done, and this is how it will help you. The farmer sees that science can make my life better, and he embraces it. So it's not really a question of the scientist if the scientist comes up with the technology, it's explained clearly in not too much jargon, basically, because you lose people along the way, and sometimes too much information really just confuses people. But then the fact that this is a technology that is available, and this is what it can do for the farmer. I mean, where I come from, the farmer is maybe not so quick to accept things, but is open, right? So it's basically a situation where these things exist. I mean, until I got involved in advocating for better access for farmers, I hadn't met any plant breeders, right? So I went to university, but I didn't know that, people were breeding. I just somehow was imagining, I don't know. So until then, I didn't meet any plant breeders. And the plant breeders that I met there was only one who was like fantastic at explaining what he had done. So, I mean, or how the technology works or how it goes. But the truth is, as with farmers, if you ask any farmer, right, we've moved from different things. We've moved from all kinds of seeds. Where we are at the point where in Nigeria we grow hybrid seeds, right? So how do I determine what variety I plant next year? I ask people, have you tried? So a company comes and they tell me my seed can do 10 tons. I'm like, okay, just show me someone who grew it and they got 10 tons. But otherwise, on our fields, what we do is we have R&D sections, right? So we realized that many people weren't trying many things. So we would put in like 5 varieties of a particular thing and would see. If this works better, then we know, okay, this is a better variety. And other farmers ask us, and we tell them. And we found that other farmers are always waiting to see what's going on in your field.
Before they change.
Yeah, and then they're going to come and ask you, what was that? How did you make corn grow like a forest?
Yes.
And they'll be willing to adapt.
They'll say you use juju.
Yeah.
Why is your farm flourishing? Why your flowers is not?
So I think that farmers are generally open to new things. They just need to know that these things are there, and just like they say, seeing is believing, right? And I think that giving power to the farmer is very important, so that the farmer has a right to choose. So like she said, with the whole debate on GM or no GMO, now this is not a conversation that is going on among farmers in Nigeria. It's an elitist conversation that's going on somewhere up in the air. And the farmer doesn't really get asked, do you want the technology or don't you? The technology is just not available to you, so you don't even have a choice. So the farmer is the one who deals with the fall armyworms, has to spend money, has to lose money. The farmer is the one who is doing all the weeding. So in a country where you're weeding manually, I mean, that's a lot of work. And in 2018, it's work that people don't need to be doing.
Well, I think that's a great spot to end on, because I think that's a really strong message to a lot of the folks that we have in this room who, some work in the private sector. We've got folks from NGOs that, are working on all of these things. And I think, hearing from both of you sort of how communication is such a key piece is really helpful for folks that are here, and, hopefully something that you can all take back to what you do. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. I'd like to welcome up the second panel. Just wherever. We've got Julie Borlaug, who is the VP of Communications and Public Relations for Inari. Sarah Hovinga is a senior scientist with Bayer. And then Bonnie McClafferty is the director of the food value chain at Gain. So thank you all so much for joining us. And I hope you guys found that discussion as engaging as I did. And so I'd be interested in your thoughts, particularly Sarah, let's start with you as a scientist. What is your response to, a lot of the things that you just heard in terms of how that communication can be improved when we're talking about innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. When Patience was talking about that and Nyasha earlier, it's absolutely an area that I see there's a huge gap in communication. We both want the same thing. So scientists in agriculture are really trying to look at ways that we can use the innovations that we're coming up with on the lab bench and contribute to the food supply. And then the grower wants to contribute to that as well. And we come to it at that plane, but then the scientist is using these jargon terms that just don't make a lot of sense. And I think from a scientist perspective, also what needs to be considered is thinking of the now. So we're thinking of crop innovations that could come in 10 years and 20 years, things that we're working on in the laboratory that will eventually be there. But what do we have right now, and what are the practical conditions? I've had the fortunate experience of being able to travel around the world and speak to growers, and that experience was just so amazing. It really opened my eyes to, I as a young scientist, I would come to the field and want to talk about, so we do biological control research, and so I want to talk about beneficial bacteria, and I want to talk about microbes and how they colonize roots, and I'm just so excited to talk about what I'm doing.
And I was just going to say, and I can tell by the way you're talking about it now, how excited you are about your work.
And then I go to the grower, and it's just like, okay, but does it work? And how, I don't understand how to use it.
What does it mean for me?
What does it mean for me? This is how I farm. Can you tell me how you would work there in terms of work in your products? And so I think coming to that realization of you can have something incredibly innovative and interesting in the laboratory, and yes, it has to work in the end in the field, and your customer has to know how to use it. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah.
And I think what you said about, sometimes the time lag of how long it takes. And so if you've got farmers in Nigeria that have a problem with fall armyworm right now, they want to know, what can you do to help me right now with fall armyworm? I can't wait 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
And Julie, I'd love to hear from you, since one of the things that your company is aiming to do is to really bridge that communication gap and work with smallholder farmers, be there on the ground, allow people to have that input from the beginning so that something is actually being developed for them. Could you tell us a little bit about how you see that process playing out?
Well, first I want to thank CropLife International DevEx for allowing me to come back. I apparently haven't been so bad that they let me each year. How many farmers do we have in the room? This is my favorite event. I don't call it a side event, I call it the main event, because it always puts farmers first. So thank you, Mary. Thank you both. You should really be up here continuing to speak, really, not me at least. And I also wanted to point out that we have a 2018 laureate in the audience. So I wanted, David, will you wave? Thank you for coming. So thank you for being here. Oh, do we have another laureate? We do, from 2 years ago. Will you wave?
Yeah.
Sweet potato.
Yeah.
Can't forget you. So I work at Inari Agriculture, and we are a breeding company, and that is all we will focus on. Yes, we'll be using gene editing, but we'll also be using epigenetics. The great thing about this company, it's a startup. So when they brought me in early on, they understood that communications, their R&D team was very important, but they understood that communications was just as important, that gene editing technology and others had to be accepted. We couldn't make the mistakes of the past with what happened with GMOs, and that we also had to be front and center in terms of regulatory. We had to let DC and other regulatory agencies and different countries know who we were, ask them some questions before we went into production with any of our products, and really get an understanding, but make a voice for the smaller companies. We want to be disruptive. If you can imagine me standing up here and saying disruptive, I'd like to yell it. We want to change the seed industry. And how we want to do that is we want to go, my CEO and our head of products are here right now. They're actually not at the World Food Prize. They're out meeting with potential customers. So seed companies, and then the growers, because we want to hear from them. And we want to hear what they have to say, what they're looking for in traits, what they need, and with the seed companies, what their growers need. So we want to be more personalized or localized in our approach, and we think that's radically different than what we've seen in the past, let's say 10, 20 years. But we also want to have a communication strategy that's very different. If you've ever been on our website, inari.com, they let me go wild, and it does not look like an agricultural website you've ever seen. It doesn't look like a biotechnology company you've ever seen, and that was on purpose. I have said over and over, we got to change the message. Well, it was time for me to actually do my part in changing the message. So we came out with a very different look. It caused a lot of more questions and curiosity than giving you information, and that was the point. It'll be evolving with more information starting in November. But it was finally a way to say, we're going to take this differently. We're going to have this conversation. It's not going to be our side versus your side. It's going to be a conversation, and we're really going to focus on the needs of the growers and the seed companies. But also, when we're talking to the public, have a different face. I don't want to use all the buzzwords. We all know the $9 billion people story, but the public doesn't believe in it. So let's not talk about that. Let's radically change the conversation. And it was just what you were talking about. I wish we had extension programs like we have been fortunate in the United States to have, to go out and talk to the farmers in Africa and other developing areas. But what's so important is we have you. And I'm sorry if I'm going to say this, if we could multiply female farmers, because we had a great one.
Apologizing for that? I don't think we need to apologize about that.
We've had a great few from Uganda and other areas. If we could just multiply you, and with gene editing, we might be able to. That's on the human side, though. We're going to blame that on the human side, not on ag. But thank you for what you do. We need more of you. But again, for everyone in here, I always warn people, let's stop making CRISPR the next GMO. Let's start talking about all the different tools in the genomic revolution that we're using and how great it's going to be, but not fixate or get the public fixated on one thing that seems scary. So again, make it different. You can go look at our website, look at some of our videos for recruiting young R&D. We work in multidisciplinary approach. So we have agronomists, biologists, software engineers, data scientists, scientists who have worked in the life sciences and the medical field who have come over and want to bring some of their expertise over. And we really highlighted them as the spokespeople of Inari because you've seen all of our faces or our leadership faces. It's the next generation, and it's time to promote them. So it's very different, and my company is tired of hearing me say, be different, we're not being different. You're falling back on your old ways, but I believe we all need to push ourselves so that we can make sure no female farmer spends hours weeding ever again.
Bonnie, I want to bring you into this conversation because a really key piece of this that we haven't yet touched on is nutrition and how crop technology and innovation can really help, after a product is leaving the farm. And I'd love to hear a little bit about, why that's so important, why we obviously need to focus on, the weeding, and that's an issue because it takes up so much of people's time, et cetera. But what are some of the other considerations we should have in mind when we're thinking about innovation and thinking about technology and what that means for a product after it leaves the farm?
So much to say. First of all, let's talk about the consumer, right? Let's talk about the consumer in need and their nutritional requirements and whether we are actually focusing our investments, focusing our research, no matter how we do it, and bravo, on the right foods. We don't need this for more maize. We need this for vegetables. We need this for small grains. We need this for, yes, animal source foods. We need this to make the diet diverse, affordable, available, stop loss and waste, have this iterative process between, and I love the word growers, these are growers, and going back to patients, these folks are looking for business, right? So let's think of them as part of the business, and they will respond, right? So I really think that there's a whole piece in here of thinking of this whole continuum. First, let's change the diet. Let's change the commodity. We know we can breed for better nutrients. We know we can select better varieties that are more nutritious. So let's start from the very beginning, introducing and working with those commodities that start with nutrition. So that's the first thing. But if I may, Teresa, I think this question of innovation is critical. We are about to experience the most disruptive time in our lives for technology, right? We've got a confluence of big data, robotics, Internet of all things, universal connectivity, the access, particularly to young minds and consumers, is going to be entirely different, and they will shape the way the food system works. What if they went to patients and said, patients, I'd really like 10,000 metric tons of your maize, but I want it to be biofortified. You could say, hey, I could do that, or I'll get my cooperative to do that, and we can order it quickly. We're not waiting for the system to catch up, and I don't know that we're ready. We're ready for that. That conversation needs to start happening, because innovation needs to bring nutrition to the table from the very beginning. And Julie's grandfather, he moved mountains. He saved millions of lives. We also want a nutritionist now to be sitting there, not just plant breeders.
And Julie, do you think that's sort of a challenge in terms of bringing that piece into the conversation at this point? And sort of, how do we go about making that as key as the messages that we've been spreading all along?
Well, I'm always very honest and say my grandfather was about yield. He really was. Unfortunate. He knew nutrition was important, but I wish he had been.
He did. He was about calories.
He was about calories and increased fiber, but on the vegetable, horticulture side, we haven't yet been there. But I think there's a big awareness now, and I think how we win over the consumer, or how we get them to come to the table to have a discussion, is talk about nutrition, talk about the medical side of feeding the world, and change it from such I think most people think we're only there to just push our crops and our cells, and we're not really concerned about the human or even the grower, or they don't feel we're concerned about the environment. But I think nutrition offers a way for so many people to start understanding why food is so important, and then the fact that food is agriculture. That's another conversation we need to have. But I think it makes it a more even playing field and a little less controversial when we start with nutrition, which we should, and talk about how innovation through agriculture research can change what we're facing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also from a science perspective, you were mentioning big data. That's something that comes into play hugely, because yield, let's say you're measuring one factor and you know that this input or this fertilizer will affect yield, and it's kind of one correlation. But then nutrition, it's so complex. You have sugars and anthocyanins, and you have all of these different components that are going on, and we're collecting so much data on a daily basis in agriculture. And we really need to invest in data scientists to really understand how all of these different factors are at play with one another, because it can really tailor how we're using our agricultural tools to produce higher yields, but then also more nutritious crops in the end. And so it's something that we're really interested in, for example.
Yeah, and I wonder too if that, can be of assistance sort of in the communication piece too. And, when you were talking about farmers want to know, does this work? And if you've got a bunch of data that says, yes, here, it does work.
Yeah, well, and you come back to kind of the communication aspect and that Julie was talking about in terms of how you relate to the average person. And I was listening to a podcast, How I Built This, and they were talking about companies like Stitch Fix, for example, and how much data science they have behind all of the different algorithms that go into what the client is actually selecting, and how much data science has been able to add to that industry. Or even you think about the medical field. The medical field is so advanced in terms of understanding how someone's genetics, what they're eating on a daily basis, what medical interactions they may have. Think about all of this knowledge that we can bring from some of these other industries that are perhaps more accessible to the everyday person in terms of a communication standpoint, and then make that analogy to agriculture.
So, Teresa, Absolutely, and big data is going to help. It's very complicated nutrition, right? You can, from a plant breeder perspective, you can breed for nutrients, you can breed for promoters, you can take out inhibitors. It's complicated. And until we can really harness the power of this data, we can understand that food matrix better in terms of nutrition to be able to breed for it. So I just say it's almost a whole new discipline you need. You need nutritional breeders or nutritional genomicists, right?
Yep.
Another piece of this that I want to talk about is regulation and sort of the barrier that we see that play in, getting all the things that we're talking about out to the farmers that really need it. And so, Sarah, I'd love to hear from your perspective as a scientist, sort of how you work on that issue and how, you're in a lab at Bayer and you've got something great and, biologicals are a new product that aren't regulated everywhere, sort of how you go about making sure that the regulations are either in place or not in place, depending upon what they are, that make sure that that biological can actually get to the farmer.
Yeah, so you're going to have that challenge no matter what industry you're in terms of bringing innovation to the market, having this challenge with regulation, because if you are a true innovator, this technology hasn't existed before. And so when you run into the problem we were discussing before in terms of communication, how do you make sure that everyone's on the same page, just making sure that they really understand the science behind the tool that you're bringing to the market. So from a scientist perspective, that's something that's incredibly important to me with whether it's plant breeding, whether it's biological crop protection, like what we work on, because really understanding what this new tool is and what makes it different is crucial to making sure the regulatory path fits what that tool was intended to do. For example, in some places, we're really having discussions with the authorities, making sure that they understand, the regulatory pathways that we have for conventional crop protection products don't necessarily apply to biological crop protection products. There might be tests that just don't make sense from a scientific perspective. Or B, maybe there's different tests that you might need to do because it's a totally different topic. And so engaging in that conversation from the educational standpoint is really where you start and just building that relationship. And so, yeah.
And Julie, you mentioned how your company is working to disrupt and you want to be doing things a different way. How do you sort of come at that with the regulation piece in mind in terms of overcoming some of these hurdles of, if you're innovating so quickly, the regulation basically hasn't caught up and that's a barrier to getting things where they need to be?
Well, just in terms of DC regulatory side of things, we spent a lot of time there. Even before we knew what our go-to-market strategy and what our products were going to be, we spent a lot of time just getting the understanding for where they were going, how they thought gene editing and other new tools would actually work out, because you can never have the USDA, EPA, and FDA all together, but getting a better understanding. And we've done that when we're going to have facilities in Europe and South America. So we've spent a lot of time laying the groundwork, introducing ourselves, but our main thing we have said to them was, let us help you. Let us help you tell this story of why innovation and this type of technology is important. Please use us to your advantage. And I think you said it right, outreach and education. So whether it's the congressional members or their staff, or the public, the more you can go to the consumer early on, any part of the public, and educate them about the potential, what you're trying to do, get some buy-in from them, and that outreach will pay off in the end. We've learned that sitting back 15 years and then realizing the public and regulatory didn't really matter, or listening and educating didn't matter, didn't work out well for us. So the earlier we get to it, I think the better.
And Bonnie, this comes in on the nutrition side as well, because obviously we're concerned about getting biologicals into a country so farmers can use them and have high yields. But then you've got a product, and it also needs to get out to the consumer, as you mentioned. And so where does the regulation piece come in when we're talking about nutrition and making sure that we're not losing a bunch of the yield to waste before it actually can feed people?
So there's a lot of work to be done there. I mean, ordinarily the sequence is legislation leads to regulation leads to standards, right? And oftentimes we don't even have the regulation or the legislation. So I wonder, and I would love to get some exchange here. Self-regulation, right, has been tried.
Right.
Sometimes disastrously, but sometimes there are shining lights in self-regulation. And I'm wondering, how we foster until we can catch up. How much can we rely on or foster or convene or provide some guidance into self-regulation until legislation follows regulation follows standards? Because we're not there. In many countries, we're not there.
And how do you sort of go about that, particularly in places where you've got, a political situation that's changing very quickly, and how you go about sort of, if you've been doing a lot of work with certain folks that are in a position and then that changes, how does that sort of impact your ability to, get the legislation and move on that chain?
Well, there's plenty of people in the room, and probably not me, who have been chipping away at this for a long time. I don't have the answer. This is not my world, but obviously you need to have a sustainable approach that goes beyond politic, and really, we often worked with, with the career public servants to continue an agenda, right? You have to somehow keep that train moving while the politics is spinning around, to allow for decisions to keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Kind of on the topic of just stewardship and how we make sure that kind of from the self-regulation, I think that's something that these industries bringing forward new tech tools really need to be aware of. And again, I think it comes back to communication and education. And so getting out in front of the issue. For example, on the biological control side, it's something that's, it's very easy, frankly, for me at a family barbecue to talk about what I do because everyone's really excited. Oh, biological control, beneficial bacteria, tell me more about what you do. And I could see how that could be, a train that could go very fast in terms of there's lots of players in the space, but I think we need to be very cognizant that we put out good products that actually work. Otherwise, they have the potential of getting their name burned, and we don't want that because there's really good science being done behind it, really good understanding for why these products work, and we need to use that, communicate that, and educate people on the science side of what's going on. And also on the safety factor, microbes, they're very ubiquitous in nature. There are good microbes, there are bad microbes. We need to be able to sort through them from the safety side of things too. And so just being out in front of these stewardship issues and making sure all of the benefits, yes, but then all of the risks and mitigating for those way ahead of time.
Julie, did you want to chime in on that as well?
I would just say that we're honest, and I think probably the majority, we support regulatory. And that makes some people's mouths drop when I say we support regulatory, we believe in regulatory, and this is why we believe in regulatory. If we need to have the discussion on what are the negatives of over-regulatory and how that cuts out small business and innovation, that's fine, but we believe there has to be regulatory, and definitely for the consumers, but to protect the environment, protect all people. So I think being transparent and honest, and we have, I don't know if many of you know Jennifer Doudna, kind of the mother of CRISPR, but she's a great scientist to really watch and see how she's very transparent about the technology she has been spearheading and moving forward, and I think that's something to learn from the beginning. She's been very open and honest, and I think it's been really successful for her.
So we are going to move into audience Q&A, but before we do that, I want to go back to Patience and Nyasha and give them an opportunity to respond to the conversation that we've just been having here, if they have any thoughts for all the things we just covered in our second panel.
Well, I think on the nutrition aspect of things, with a lot of crop, being biofortified or just generally being, we have some potatoes with vitamin A. It's just basically, I think it's a way of killing two birds with one stone. You know, so you get people to eat, so you're dealing with food security issues, and then at the same time, you're solving issues of people who wouldn't otherwise maybe be able to eat a balanced diet. And so I think it's key going forward also to look at that aspect of integrating it all and having it all in one.
I was actually paying much more attention on the regulation part. I think I would have loved to know more how you did the regulation part so that we can see how we can actually improve the regulation part when it comes to new technologies in Africa, because I feel that there is a resistance for something new. People fear something new. So how do we bridge that gap in making sure that new regulatory policies are formed and accepted and they're pushed forward? So I wanted to know more on that.
And do you feel like that's something that comes up in conversation, you know, when you're talking to people?
Yes, it does, because for new technologies in agriculture, when they have to do something with science, well, I'll put in quotes just one of the aspects, GM, right, GM technology. It's more of the policies that are there in Africa that are not allowing farmers to have that choice. So if they are not enabling policies that allows that technology to be accepted in that country, which means farmers are missing out. So we need people who understand that and make regulation policies that accept that. So for me, that's really important for the policies to be changed.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone want to respond to that?
I guess in my experience, that's, you had asked me on the side kind of maybe what some of my frustrations were around some of these newer agricultural technologies coming to market, and kind of having to do with your question, Nyasha, is it takes time. And I think it's, you know, on the science side of things, it takes time to develop some of these newer technologies, but let's say it's there already. It takes time to interact with these authorities. And I remember I was in China, you know, 4 years ago talking about biological control, and still we're not selling our products in the country. And so I'm kind of, as a scientist, wanting to see, let's say, the fruits of my labor, of the education, of the communication. And so, and you know, that's not to say that we're the only people having these conversations, but I think it's really pertinent on the community as a whole to really drive that conversation. And exactly like what you're saying, bring people together, bring the growers together, saying we need these technologies, we trust in these technologies, we have the pathways for these technologies, just put them in our hands, let's go forward. So I think the whole community needs to come together and really communicate that.
I think the only thing I would add is the United States. I'm going to leave Europe out of this one. The United States, Argentina, Canada, Australia really have good regulatory or getting better at it. And I think it's all these different countries that need to support the countries, whether in Africa or other developing areas, so that they can form their own regulatory. So you don't depend on, let's just say, for example, Europe. But you have your own regulatory, and you can go back to your people and say, we are protecting you, this is our regulatory, we're representing our people. So I think it's us supporting the building of your regulatory.
Bonnie, did you want to chime in too?
So I actually have a question for Bear. And Sarah, you know, so we're talking about developing traits that are favorable to growers, right? And meet the constraints of growers, remove constraints for growers. But does a company like Bayer, do they look back at the consumer? Because if the grower's growing it and the consumer's not buying it, then you're stuck, right? So does Bayer, or do we then rely on Cargill to communicate with you what the demand is, or Kellogg to move back toward you in the supply chain? Where is that supply chain with big company? How does that work? Because you could produce all the greatest, invest in all the greatest R&D, but if the consumer ends up saying, sorry, I'm not going to eat it, I'm not going to buy it, then what do you do? Like, how do you anticipate that?
Yeah, it's, as you can imagine, it's a question with not a straightforward, simple answer. But I mean, I guess that as best as I can do is that's part of our early research development process now, is really taking into consideration what the regulatory aspects would be like 10 years from now. Like, let's say we're just starting a project, you know, what risks do we see to this project 10, 20 years down the road that could impact this? So that's from the regulatory side, of course, but then also from the grower side, how are these different trends going to be impacting this project 10 years from now that we're bringing down the pipeline? Also, so Bayer has a very active area called food chain partnership, where we're really working with some of these. So kind of the next step beyond just the grower. So the grower is our customer, and we're selling our products usually directly to them, but we know that the grower is eventually going to sell their crops to the Kellogg's, the companies like that. And so we also need to be in tune with what their sustainable initiatives are, for example. And so really working that into a whole package, that it's not only about the science, and this science is really cool and it works, but also what are all of these other factors that are going to impact something that we're bringing down the line 10 to 20 years later. Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to open it up to all of you now. We've got a microphone, so please wait for it to get to you. State your name and affiliation, and feel free to direct your question to any of our panelists, patients, and Nyasha as well down there. And sure, that gentleman in the back in the blue.
Part of the dimensions that you've listed and gone after in innovation, one of the things I think that is gigantically missing is the interference of innovation by large corporate entities. And I don't mean to pick on you, sir, or anything, but the reality is that like we've been going through this for several years as we bring a new antimicrobial into the market. And Europe was very simple for us to get stuff done, okay? But US, no, okay? And it was both a change in administration that devastated an agency and its ability to write letters that says you passed testing. And it was also about corporate interference testing all the way along the line, because they can lobby into the process of testing and say, oh, this isn't really what it is, and you need to do that again. So there's that process. And then we have 5 nations where we've been testing. We have some 50 nations where we actually have criminal prosecution against corporate interference with government test labs trying to do our work. So I think that one of the things we need to look at in the process of this is that this is occurring in an environment that's gigantically structured in the favor of things of giant concentrations of capital that work significantly against emergent innovation. Because emergent innovation, unless it's controlled by giant capital, is a threat to the upper echelon and their report to the markets, right? And the report to the markets is what drives a lot of the interference with innovation. We'll either buy you or we'll crush you. So what do you want it to be? And so I don't say that to be nasty. I'm a sociologist. I teach sociology at the University of Iowa. My whole gig and my whole life has been to watch the abuse of power. And in food is a place where power is abused significantly, that we seldom actually address here, because we're always talking in the positive language of innovation as opposed to the not so positive language of interference and crushing. So any of you can take it.
So I guess a question in there is, sort of how you play that balance between larger companies that are doing the work like you're doing, and companies maybe more along the model of Inari that are working with smaller farmers. And obviously it's a massive industry, and I think there's space in there for everyone. But sort of how you navigate who should be doing what and what the best roles for everyone are.
I think it's exciting time in agriculture right now, because you have had the mergers, but that's also created so much space for young startups. We don't have a pipeline that we've invested in the past. We can start and look 10, 15 years ahead, which is a great benefit. But I think out of the public response and out of people really interested in seeing maybe a new model that might work differently, or I don't want to say better, but just a different approach, that you see more startups coming into agriculture. And I think that's a big positive.
And kind of for me, it goes back to at least from my specific experience, I'm not sure kind of what experiences you're speaking to specifically, but in biological control, for example, I mentioned the good, bad microbes, and one of the reasons that's so important in terms of educating some of the authorities that are out there is, can you imagine the repercussions that would happen if there were a biological control product that went out there and made people sick? That would just be awful. And so from a scientific standpoint, it's really contingent on us as companies to really communicate what we know scientifically about how these products work and where they don't work and where we should not develop them, because it either doesn't make sense scientifically or it would be a risk to the population. That's just not worth taking, no matter what kind of crop protection it gives you. And so I think it goes back to stewardship. And speaking from my specific example, we would be doing ourselves as an agricultural industry a disservice if we didn't intervene in the conversations about really important topics such as that. And then from let's say the power that some of these bigger companies might have in terms of being able to have these discussions, we're definitely not the only player, but let's say we're able to carve a pathway for biological control products in one country or the other. It leaves a big space, and with a company like Bayer, able to have that conversation and able, let's say, to put the investment into that pathway. Now that pathway exists, and other companies can sell products in that space, and it stimulates that innovation. So I guess it depends on what side of the coin one is looking at.
And I think scalability comes into that as well, because obviously if you've got a company the size of Bayer, you're perhaps equipped to disseminate your technology in a way that a smaller company is not set up to do. Mm-hmm. All right, any other questions? Yeah. And if you could state your name and affiliation.
My name's Christopher Samuel. I work with Bayer. Just a comment, having worked in Asia on other so-called developing countries' access to technologies, there are mechanisms. I think the conversation that we learned to be effective was starting with what's the country vision for ag, food and ag, which crops in that system make a difference. So if it's nutrition, are we talking about vegetables? Is there a role in protein for corn and soy? Do you already have something? And as a subset of that, what are you looking for in products or partnerships? You then get to what regulation you need to enable it. And we found two paths to that. One, mutual recognition agreements were advanced by some countries. Vietnam is an example. Looking at one aspect of product regulation on safety. And then as they looked at the environmental impact and safety, they wanted to do something in country without mutual recognition. But there are mechanisms that exist to enable access that do not need someone to start from scratch and take 10 years to build, with coalition governments changing every 3 years from the kinds of countries we come from.
Does anyone want to respond to that? Bonnie, I'd love to hear from you sort of. Oh. Yeah, sure.
Hi, I'm Alvarez from the Philippines. I'm a farmer and just recently a member of the Global Farmer Network. My question might be a question that had been asked before, or maybe had been answered before as well, since I was busy driving my tractor. I'm coming from a perspective of a developing nation, the Philippines, and I hear this so many times in farmers' conferences that when will the price of corn seeds, particularly the GM, the BT seeds, become lower and affordable for farmers like me and farmers below me? Like I said, it might have been asked before and it might have been answered already, but it would be good to, for my benefit also, to to represent the farmers in my country to ask that question directly to you. So, because we don't get this privilege of that often to be sitting here and asking you directly the questions.
And I think that's a great strength of this conference and how we're all here together and, facilitating this conversation actually between farmers and, folks that are other areas of agriculture. So I'd love to hear your response on that.
I think I'll follow up on that question because from a farmer's perspective is we see a lot of profits being reported out there, especially in the internet. And how come it doesn't translate? Like, why can't the company? This is not a criticism. This is just a crazy response to what we see. Why can't like Monsanto or Bayer just in one season give a variety that is a gift to the farmers that very low cost that will enable us to produce so much that will minimize our cost directly, and it creates a season wherein everybody's happy, the farmers are happy, we create a big impact in production. The traders won't be able to squeeze us, and everybody's happy.
And to tell you the truth, so I'm a scientist coming at the perspective of meeting with growers like you. I've had the pleasure of going to the Philippines and Davao a couple times to see banana production, and so I've been able to interact with growers there quite a bit. But it's frankly, it's not my area of expertise in terms of pricing. I know from working with my other colleagues that there's a lot of different things that go into that. In terms of the research involved, I can definitely speak to that. I mean, something that we might be developing in the laboratory on the biological control standpoint could take anywhere from 8 to 10 years. And you think of all of the scientists and work that's involved in understanding the mode of action, and that's only on the science side, and then you have the regulation that needs to go through the marketing, the product supply, the chain, and so there's all of these different factors at play. And as you know, also working in the agricultural field, you change one of those parameters and it has a shift on everything else. And so I think as a whole, kind of as a general answer, would be really making sure that we're making the smartest decisions that we can about what products to use, when to use them, when more applications may not necessarily provide benefit, where more plantings may not necessarily provide benefit, where one particular regulatory pathway may not make sense because it's going to be more, it just doesn't make sense for the science, but then additionally it could be more costly, for example. And so that's where I think just making smart science-based decisions for what you're doing will lead to more efficient production.
And Bonnie, you wanted to respond to that as well?
So I wanted to just touch on the price that farmers get. And so about 3 weeks ago, I was in Ethiopia, and we are looking at the tomato supply chain to reduce loss and waste. And more, again, innovation, technology, farmers are getting directly connected to retail, directly connected. So the whole middle of the supply chain, or at least at the wholesalers, is getting bypassed. So that price is getting translated. The retailers are working with the farmers to get the price because they're connected. So it's really interesting to see what technology and innovation can do to bypass where this inequity is happening between farmer price and consumer price. It's happening rapidly. Retailers are going straight to farmers and bypassing the system. So I think we just keep an eye on it.
I'm going to have a good answer for you. We are bringing down the cost of corn for you. We'll have it for you. Give me a few years. But that is one of our main goals at Inari, is to disrupt the model, like you were saying, make it more direct to you. And our whole mission is to drive down that cost of the seed just for you. So hang with me for a few years. Hang with me for a few years, but we can get it for you.
All right, well, I think that's a great spot to end on, a little bit of a call to action here.
Now, don't quote that to my CEO when she is wandering. No, she's the one. She is
Well, I'll be
leading
back
that
here in a couple years. We're going to check in with you on that,
well-
Julie. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks so much to our panelists for being here. Please join me in thanking them.